My name is Bill Burke, and together with my friend Mike Washoe, we are both facilitators for this program, and we will facilitate this particular part of the program now, where you will have the pleasure of hearing from Peter Stern. Tell you a little bit about Peter. He was born in 1936 of March in Nuremberg, Germany. His father was an auto mechanic and was actually a vocational educational teacher, taught VOTEC. His mother raised both he and his younger brother Sam, who was still with us today. The middle of the story will be Peter's to tell. I would just tell you that the end of it is in 1947, he was able to immigrate to America, came to New York City in January of 47. 1954, he finished high school. Also, 4 years after that, he graduated from the University of Missouri with a degree in metallurgical engineering. He's currently married, has 2 sons and grandchildren, and he now lives in Haverford in the Philadelphia, PA area. As you listen to him, I just ask you to do one thing. Think about what it would have been like for you to go through what he went through. Your ages would have been fairly similar, okay? Leaving your house, your family, your possessions in the middle of the night and not knowing where you're going. The other thing is we're going to leave about 10 minutes at the end of the program for you to ask him questions. And that's what he really wants. He really wants you to listen to him and then ask questions. So without further ado, Peter Stern, it's your table. You're right here. That's you.
All right. Before we start, I would like you to think about a question or come up with an answer at the end of this program, which is, why is it that we, survivors, come and speak to you? What is it that we want? And we do want something. My name is Peter Günther Stern. A little bit Germanic. My brother's name is Samuel. And it's no accident that his name is Samuel. In 1935, the Germans passed something called the Nuremberg Laws, the town there that I was born in. And those laws prescribed what Jews could do. So if you were a doctor, you could no longer practice in a hospital. If you were a teacher, you could no longer teach in public schools. There were all kinds of business and other rules. My father, who was an auto mechanic and auto electrician, lost his business because of that law. And there were many very addendums to this law, the final solution being one of them. However, as I said, in 1935, this law was passed, and it said all Jewish children will have to have Jewish names. So boys would have to be named Moses, Abraham, Israel, all names out of the first book of the Bible. Girls would be Sarah, Esther, Ruth. Yet my name is Peter. And the reason is they didn't fully publish the laws. They wanted good publicity for the 1936 Olympics that were being held in Berlin. So they kept it quiet. It was only after the Olympics that they enforced that portion of the law. Also, by 1939, Jews, and there weren't that many left in the city anymore, but all the Jews were moved to Jew houses, as they were called. This was not a ghetto. These were houses throughout the city where all the Jews were forced to live. We lived in a house with about 4 other families, which had been a large single family house near the Bahnhof, which had been subdivided. And we were there from somewhere around 1939, because we were there when my brother was born. We were there until November 1941. By the way, let me just make an excuse right now. By November 1941, I was about 3 months shy of being 6 years old. When I talk about time, time is a very fungible thing. What I remember to be a long time might have been a very short time. I'll give examples throughout my talk, but you'll have to forgive me. And you will also forget when you did certain things. At any rate, in 1941, November, an order was given by some authority that from Bavaria, 1,000 or so Jews were going to be shipped to Latvia, which was newly conquered territory, because the Germans had broken a treaty with the Soviets, who had divided Poland, and they attacked the Soviet Union and took over Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, which were all territories of the Soviet Union. Shipping 1,000 people from Bavaria meant that they were going to ship about 520 people, all above the age of, they counted only people above the age of 10 years old, I believe. So I wasn't really counted, or my brother. But of 520 came from Nuremberg, and we were shipped to Latvia. Let me tell you now, of those 520 plus, there were 17 survivors, my brother, mother, and I being 3 of them. We were shipped to a place called Jungfernhof, which wasn't really a concentration camp, more than a field with huts on it where people were basically stored. We, through some good fortune, were there for only possibly a week. Research is now being done on that. And of the 5,000 to 6,000 people that went through that particular place, there were only 140 survivors at the end of the war. So I can count myself among those as well. As I said, we were taken out of that and put into the Riga ghetto. And this ghetto was people from Germany and Lithuania and Latvia, Jews. When we were put into that, I remember the buildings being extremely cold. I don't think they were heated. And looking out the window and seeing truckloads of people being taken away. And I knew that this was not a good thing to be happening to these people for whatever reason. We were there for, again, a short period of time. And we were taken out of the ghetto, I mean my family, and put into a building which was a small apartment building in a group of similar small apartment buildings, which mostly were occupied with German troops. The house we were in had fellow Jews, both Latvian and German. And from this house, my father took a whole bunch of boys which had been his pupils in Nuremberg. And I'm going to go back and talk about that just in a little bit. And they were taken out to fix German army vehicles. Before we were shipped out, and from the place, that Jew house, my father, who no longer had a business, worked in a Jewish school, and he taught boys shop, vocational skills. And some of those boys were also shipped to Latvia. And he took those boys and they fixed German army vehicles in Latvia. Now, in this building, there were a lot more people than just those boys and my family. There were some families, and they also had a job. And their job was to sort the clothing of the people that had been killed. They sorted clothing into men's, women's, winter, summer, children's, different piles. And this clothing was sent back to Germany. We were there for a while, and I would say in the summer of 1942, we were moved to the location of where they had the cars. And my mother would be cooking for those boys and the rest of us, and they didn't have to be transported to do the work. My brother and I were probably just underfoot for a lot of things. I have some memories of that. We were there again for a while. And somewhere in the spring, maybe early summer, 1943, we were shipped to what had been a farming village, or was still a farming village, in Russia itself, closer to the front. This was an area which had no fencing, and I don't know what I did with it. No fencing, no guards. Although there were a lot of German soldiers there who were there to protect the cars. The rule was that if any of the boys escaped or tried to escape, we, my father's family, would be killed. I didn't know about this till after the war. Our mother told this to my brother and me. This was a place where at night, I remember waking up to machine gun fire, really only once that I have a vivid memory thereof. My mother told us that this was almost a nightly occurrence. It wasn't a bad time, certainly for my brother and me. We were somewhat spoiled by the German soldiers there, because the reality was we probably reminded them of what was home, but it was certainly different. And we were there. While we were there, my father, and I think some of the boys, were taken into a city in Russia to fix an electrical appliance, generator, transformer, I don't know what. But while there was an attack of Soviet forces, and my father saved the life of a German officer. I don't know the man's name. At any rate, they returned, and a little while after that, the Germans got to be aware that they were losing the war. In fact, the war was already lost after the Battle of Stalingrad. When we were shipped back to Riga, the boys were returned to what was left of the ghetto, and most of them were killed. We, my family, were sent to the men's civil prison in Riga. So it was, if you've ever seen a movie of prison life, that's exactly what it was like. We lived in a cell on the second floor or third floor of this building. There was a suicide screen in the center so people couldn't jump to commit suicide. My mother never left that cell. My father, brother, and I would occasionally be taken to the exercise yard, and we could walk around the yard. We were there for about 3 months. So near the end of 1943, we were taken out, and this was the first time that I remember my parents being scared. I'm sure they had been before, maybe constantly, but I was at that point very aware. And we were put into another cell in the basement. It was dark, it had names carved into the walls, and didn't know what was going to happen. What did happen was that we were put onto a truck, which was part of a convoy of about 3-4 trucks. And these were trucks the size of a very large pickup. And they were loaded with clothing that was being taken back into Germany. We rode on the back of these trucks. We were all on one truck. From Latvia, and I wish I had my display here showing you the map, through what must have been Poland, back into Germany. It was cold. It was spectacular. The skies were clear. as a young boy, I was totally amazed. We were taken into Germany and probably the city of Nuremberg, not Nuremberg, excuse me, Berlin. We were there, given up to the civil authorities, and we were, I don't know what story was told, but at any rate, the soldiers surrendered us to the civil authorities, and we were put in front of a judge who I remember yelling at my parents. And he then sent my father to Buchenwald, which was one of the first concentration camps formed after Hitler took power. And my mother, brother, and I were sent to Ravensbrück, which was the only women's concentration camp built. All the concentration camps had women, but this was specifically designed for women, 1938-39. When we got there, which was the end of 1943, beginning 1944, things that I've read say that it was about 20% Jewish. The rest of the people there were political prisoners. They had red dots. Criminals, and I believe they had purple dots. Gypsies, who had black dots. Homosexuals, which had pink triangles. Jews, who had yellow stars or yellow triangles. It was all on their uniforms. And there were other people there as well. There were political people outside of Germany. So there was a princess of Norway. The sister of Mayor LaGuardia of New York City was in that camp. It was a conglomerate of a lot of different people. And they all worked. They worked on the farms surrounding this place. They worked in the factories that were built adjacent to the camp, most of which were dedicated to making German army uniforms. Some women in the camp who were too old to work in a factory were literally sitting there during the day knitting, making socks for the army. Some of the big corporations that still exist, Siemens, which is one of the world's largest electronic manufacturers, had attachments there. Some of the women worked in factories which made parts for the V-2 rockets. At any rate, we spent most of that year, 1944, until February of 45, in Ravensbrück. In that time period, it got to be more and more crowded and more dirty, because as the Germans were losing the war, they were emptying the camps that they had in the east and pushing the people towards the west into the camps that existed there. At one point, some of the people were being pushed from the west as well because there were a lot of Dutch Jews or German Jews who had escaped to the Netherlands before the war, thinking that they would be safe there. At any rate, come February 1945, they were emptying Ravensbrück. And we were sent, I don't know what I did to my word. I got it. Okay. Excuse me. We were sent, as I said, to Bergen-Belsen. And as bad as Ravensbrück had become, Bergen-Belsen was in horrible, horrible shape. We got there about 3 weeks after Anne Frank died. And there were no, in Ravensbrück, we had the pretense of bunks, which were just wooden slabs. And at one point, we even had straw on them. Everybody was on the floor in Bergen-Belsen. You literally had to step over bodies. Feeding was a sometime thing. And water was almost impossible to get. But at any rate, on April 15th, 1945, day which I consider my second birthday, the British Army liberated the camp. We were there, rescued. The camp was in such bad shape that the British had to dig trenches and had to bury, I think, about 20,000 bodies. Within the first few days, because the stench was horrendous. By the way, that's one of the things that no one seems to mention in terms of the camps. It was the stench that was the most prevalent thing about any of the camps, any of the rescuers, when they write about coming onto the camps. Talk about the fact that they smelled them before they saw them. But at any rate, we were there. We were then transferred out of the camp into a German military training camp, because the British were so afraid of typhus, which was prevalent throughout, that they burned Bergen-Belsen to the ground. If you went to go visit Bergen-Belsen, all you would see is a couple of monuments or whatever else, not that I've ever been back. But they burned it. We were in that military barracks. My mother had a breakdown. And it was, I would say September of 1945, when we were taken by truck back to Nuremberg, which was in the American section of Germany. We were put into a building which had been an old age home for Jews before the war. And I remember visiting it because it was right near where we were housed, walking through the old city. And we were there for about a year. The other survivors who were in that building were old people, which is very unusual. These people were the survivors of a concentration camp called Theresienstadt, which was the show camp that the Germans had for the International Red Cross, who would say, we hear bad things about concentration camps, and they would always show them the same camp where they would issue new blankets to the people, which were taken back as soon as the International Red Cross left. But they also had amenities that nobody else had, and they had old people. This is where my maternal grandparents died. And many of the old people in that camp were heroes of World War I, as my grandfather was. So they put them into this camp, and people died there too. By the way, there were many, many different camps, and people were killed, all of them. But there were some camps which were designed for killing. And this was Auschwitz, Treblinka, and so on. You can look in the map and see all the killing grounds. By the way, I would suggest, if you have a pen or a pencil, write down the word Rumbula and look it up. This was a mass killing that occurred in Latvia, Riga, right before we arrived there, because they were making room in the ghetto for the new shipment of people. So they killed about 20,000 people over a weekend. As I said, we got back to Nuremberg, stayed in this house for about a year. I tried going to school with my brother. I'd never gone to school before. Here I was 9 years old. But I don't know what it was, but somehow I could not stay in that school. My brother did, I didn't. At the end of that year, we went to a displaced persons camp. And then another one. And from that other one, in February, beginning of February 1947, we got on a boat which landed in New York, end of February 1947. When we landed, my family was put onto Ellis Island. I thought it was for about a week. My stepfather said it was about 2 days at most, because they didn't know whether I was healthy enough to stay here. Obviously, they said I was, because I'm here now. And we were released to New York. In New York, we had been met by two of my uncles. My mother's youngest brother had come to the States in 1933 at age 17. And her next brother in line had escaped from Germany. Had escaped from Germany the day before war was declared. So he was interned by the English and then sent to Canada. But at any rate, because of my health, I was shipped off to Florida with the youngest brother, which was very disturbing to me. The only thing that was recognizable to me was the Shell gasoline insignia, which is the same all over the world, and the way Black Americans were treated. This was deja vu all over again. I stayed there from beginning and stayed till May. First, in second grade, because I started school in the wrong language and without having had education. Came back to New York, went into third grade, halfway through, got skipped into fifth grade. At the end of fifth grade, got skipped into seventh grade, and I was told I was now caught up, and that was a lie, and I'm still not caught up. But nonetheless, at the end of eighth grade, with a very poor record, I went to a vocational high school because there was no place to go other than that. At the end of vocational high school, I got a job. No, I'm reversing it. I went to a community college where it took me 2.5 years to do the 2-year program. Then I got a job, worked for a year, and then I went to the Missouri School of Mines and Metallurgy and got to be an engineer. Got out, worked for 10 years as an engineer, and then switched careers and became a teacher. And you've gotten an abbreviated version, and I will answer any questions and then ask for you to give me the answer to what you had, what I asked you about. Any questions? Come on, guys.
Anybody have anything at all you'd like to ask him? Because
I will ask you a question, as I said. All right, why is it that I'm speaking here? Why is it these other people are speaking?
There's right there.
Yes. Loud.
Try and share what it was like for the survivors.
All right. By the way, I'm not going to jump up and down and say, yes, that's the right answer, because there is no particular right answer. Come on, some more.
Over there.
Come on, I got you.
So that the experiences are not forgotten.
So they're not forgotten.
Good.
Anything else? Yes, you. Oh, loudly.
Yeah.
So it won't happen again. What does that mean?
The same mistakes are repeated.
I didn't-
The same mistakes are repeated.
Okay, same mistakes. I'm going to shorten this because we don't have that much time. So it doesn't happen again. Mark Twain said, history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. Ken Burns, who's a historian and filmmaker, said, history doesn't repeat itself because human nature never changes. I say that we can change human nature, and that means you have to do something. And what is it that we, the survivors of not only this tragedy, but every tragedy, want you to do? Yes,
Make sure it doesn't happen again.
how?
By educating us.
Whoa, stand up so we can hear you.
By educating us so that we can share your stories with other generations.
Education is one thing, but I'm going to be dead in another 10 years, at least, if not earlier. I want more than that. Yes.
By actually making sure that stuff like this doesn't happen again.
How? What are you going to do so it doesn't happen again?
Self-reflection.
Self-reflection? That's pretty passive. And by the way, I'm rushing you along. Come on. What is it that we want from you? Yes.
Try to protect others.
Loud. try to protect others. How?
Pass this knowledge down to the generations after us. to keep this-
That's one thing, but what can you do on a daily basis?
Fight against hate?
I didn't hear you.
Fight against hate?
Fight against hate. How do you do that?
Speaking up?
Speaking up, speaking out. Most of the answers that I got from you, and every time I do this, are passive. You cannot be passive in this world. You have to act. Now, every act is not an act of aggression. But if you go out for politics and say what you believe, that is a positive thing, and it's an action. But sitting back and saying, that shouldn't be, that's easy. You cannot turn your back. You have to participate. Think about what's happening in Ukraine. People are saying, no, we will fight. Rightfully, wrongfully, but it is their country and they are fighting. And this is something that you have to do. You have to fight for what you think is right. By the way, the younger the audience, when I speak to them, the answer comes the quicker. And the usual answer is, you have to be kind. Be kind when you see something that shouldn't be. And that's all I have to say.